curiosity on overdrive. You feel a need for something, and it's coming alive. The moment is rising like you hoped it would. Who knew a tangent could feel so good? Let her take you on another tangent, turn a thought into a whole new planet. She'll make your sense of wonder feel gigantic. Ember lights the way like magic. You arrived to learn the facts, but you stayed for her glow. You heard her musical laugh, and her quick wit stole the show. The moment is rising like you hoped it would. Who knew a tangent could feel so good? Let her take you on another tangent, turn an idea into a whole new planet. She can piece the universe from fragments. Ember lights the dark like magic. Who knew a detour could hit like this? Smart mouth, star maps, and a sideways twist. No religion, just a mind on fire, taking us higher and higher and higher. Let her take you on another tangent, turn a thought into a whole new planet. She'll make your sense of wonder feel gigantic. Ember lights the way like magic.
Ember.
Oh, Ember.
Miss Ember.
Oh, great, Ember. Tell me what I'm doing.
Hey, Ember, how you doing?
Appreciate you, Ember.
Love Ember. She's great.
We will be yelling at Ember.
Bottom of the barrel Ember bullshit.
Oh my God, Ember. Ember.
Ember.
Ember.
Ember.
Embers.
Ember.
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 We love you, Ember.
You rock at that, Ember.
We're neighbors, Ember.
Ember is the queen.
What's up, Ember?
I see you, Ember.
I only have eyes for Ember.
Hey, Ember is hot.
Hello, everyone. Happy Odin's Day, or Woden's Day, or whichever, whether you're a heathen or an Ashtaru or you know, a pagan of some kind, whatever the case may be. Thank you so much for joining. The new music was a gift from Ryan, a goddess. So I can say a goddess gave me music, but also it's a pretty cool song. The butterfly graphic thing, of course, from Jess at How to Rule an Asteroid. People are helping with my intros. I love it, and it's so cool. Thank you all so much for being here. Today we're continuing our theme of the week, secularism across time and space. On Monday we started with the ancient atheists. Yesterday, we talked a bit about the secular societies in antiquity, the people who set the pieces in motion for what we today call humanism. And now we're going to learn about humanism. And then tomorrow, we'll move into the present and the future tomorrow. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. But thank you so much for joining. Oh, also, quick note, tonight, bonus show about the science of Project Hail Mary that I've been meaning to do for a while, but I kept having illnesses and other things. And so we're doing that tonight, hopefully, as long as I survive. I hope you joined us for that. That show's already posted. If you want to click the notify me thing after whatever, it's there. Join us. It'll be fun and sciencey and things. All right. Quick intro. Oh my goodness. Spooky's here being aggressively old. I know it's I'm pluses and minuses. Don't get me started. Don't get me started. All right, let's bloop. Behold, humanists of various sorts and varieties and things. So we love the story that we evolved into humanists. Like we finally got smart enough to realize that we matter. I'm going to have to call that one out. Humanism wasn't a promotion. It was a backup plan. We became humanists because the universe was silent and someone had to steer the ship. As I used to say in my old descriptory thing, it's just us. Nothing is coming to help us. Nothing ever has come to help us. We have to do it ourselves. So, a quick clarification. Humanism isn't atheism. In fact, like we talked about on yesterday's episode about secularism in ancient times, most humanists, even today, are theistic. It's a secular perspective, totally apart from the question of faith, if any. There are Christian humanists. There are secular humanists. There are Islamic humanists. There, every flavor of every faith, there are humanists, people who understand that we have to take care of the humans, and the gods can mostly take care of themselves, you know? So humanism is simply the idea that we can't sit back and hope some particular deity takes the helm. Or from another point of view, humans need to put the well-being of humans first, not the well-being or needs of beings who, even if they are real, aren't even telling us what the heck they want, definitely do not need anything from us, and demonstrably aren't down here helping build a better world. Whether gods are real is immaterial. We're the only ones who can help each other. So that's where our duty lies. So there's that. That's the framing. It isn't even about religion. It's about humans, because humans are all we have. Believe in what you like, but be in the real world with us, trying to build the real world. My goodness. Okay, so humanism isn't just being nice without a god. It's this radical and terrifying claim that there's no captain on this ship. There's no manager on duty in this hotel. There's no warden in this asylum. If the world is a mess, it's our fault. If there's beauty, we did that too. So most people assume that humanism started in the 14th or 17th century, something like that. No, it starts every time any civilization hits the complexity ceiling where their ancient myths can't explain reality anymore. You can't say, once you have germ theory, that it was for God's plan that grandma died of a preventable illness. Although there are people who do try to say that even today. There's people who are like, I don't need a mask, I'm bathed in the blood of Jesus. And the fact all my relatives are dead and I refuse to wear a mask and infected them, that's just God's plan. I'm not going to change. Fucking children who weirdly have a fairly high incidence of, you know what? I'm not going to say it. You know what I'm thinking. So the original humanists, you might say, the Charvaka school that we started with on Monday, around 600 BCE, everyone else is arguing over rituals and practices and doctrines and dogmas. The Charvakas are out there saying the afterlife is a scam. It's just people extracting your joy from you now so they can live better lives and promising you a bill of goods you will never receive, or at least you have no reason to believe you will receive. And by the time you find out, it's much too late to get revenge on the people who hurt you. So enjoy your life now, because this is all you get. This is what you have. It, as they said in the video on Monday, it was the first YOLO in philosophy, but it was deeply logical. The Greeks came along a few centuries later, possibly inspired by the Carvaka. Protagoras said that man is the measure of all things, and we covered that yesterday. He wasn't being arrogant. He was being practical. If we can't agree on what the heck the gods want, we can certainly agree on what we need. And maybe being helpful to each other would be good. So I want to jump back in time, but also forward in time at the same time, because I'm talented that way. There's no single widely accepted definition of humanism. Scholars have given different meanings to the term. For philosopher Sidney Hook, humanists are opposed to the imposition of one culture in some civilizations, do not belong to a church or established religion, that would be secular humanism, do not support dictatorships, and do not justify the use of violence for social reforms. Well, that's a bit more of a reach, isn't it? So this is sort of the difference in humanisms and why we have to look at humanism across time, because these, I want to say modern, but this is from half a century ago when Sidney Hook was writing. There are humanist associations, international ones, American ones, so on and so forth. And they, I don't know, I guess they get hung up on the moral question. They keep getting interrogated by theists, like, what do you base your morals on? And they feel like it's a gotcha, so they have to have an answer. And so they come up with these values, these statements of principle, whatever the case may be. And by dint of them being an organization, they seem to think they get to declare on behalf of humanism the idea, or all humanists, as if every humanist was subject to their authority, which is not a very humanist thing of them to do. Humanism is by its nature collaborative, not top-down. But humans are going to human, I suppose. There's people who want to be in charge and have power, even amongst the egalitarian folks. Whatever. It's just weird to me that you declare humanism does not support dictatorships by dictating it, and do not justify the use of violence. What, with a threat of violence? Like, where's the irony meter? That's not to talk shit about humanists. I am a humanist, but humans are human, and humans sometimes do incoherent things. That's not the same as past humanism. The humanisms we have today, the movements, the organizations, that's not the same as the philosophy. And that's what we're looking at. That's why I thought it was important to disambiguate. So another person, more recently, in 2015, a humanist named Andrew Copson defined humanism as a naturalistic understanding of the universe, science, and free inquiry that will help us comprehend more about the universe. Basically, it's a philosophical approach to science rather than a faith-based approach to finding knowledge about the universe. It's saying that by looking into science as well as philosophy, as well as free thought inquiry, I kind of like the idea, because I personally am biased towards this, what we call inspiration, or a moment of epiphany, is our brain's interesting capacity to synthesize new knowledge out of pre-existing pieces. It's an emergent property thing, but it's really cool. It's when you can take, you know, your knowledge of radioactive decay and your knowledge of alpha, beta, and gamma particles, and you can come to the realization that the particles are the products of radioactive decay, just as an off the top of the head example. And we do that kind of shit all the time. All the time. Every day people do it. They say, I can't remember where my keys are. The last place I saw I needed my keys to unlock the front door, and I don't know where my keys are. Incomplete information, but poof, maybe I left them in the front door, and then they turn out to be there, and it's like, good job, brain. You did a think. That sort of thing. So the scientific approach does not reduce humans to anything less than human beings. And this is a big argument we get from theists often too, is like, oh, you're saying that humans are just animals and have no should deserve no special place in the universe. And from the universe's perspective, that's true. If the universe drops another asteroid on us like it did the dinosaurs, it won't care how gosh darn special we are. It'll just sterilize the planet. And we need to be real about that possibility. But that doesn't mean we have to treat each other like we don't matter. Because we matter. Our families matter. Even if we don't matter to ourselves, our children matter to us. And I realize that the people I just mentioned who are too selfish to give a fuck about masks, maybe other people don't matter to them. But most of us who are still around today, who have living family members today, do give a fuck about other people. And by extension, other people beyond that, because we have the empathy for other people with their families. And we understand how they feel in their perspectives and so forth. We care about other things too. The environment, because A, it can be pretty. B, we need it to survive. And C, we don't actually own everything. This concept of ownership is a social construct. But we don't care about it as much as other people. It's a priority system. And ultimately, every moral system boils down to a priority system. It's just codified to make it more dogmatic. For some reason, I don't know why humans are so drawn to dogma. It doesn't make sense to me. Tommy says, I love Earth. It's where I keep my stuff. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. All right, so let me see here. I'm trying to get to, right, ancient humanism. Going back to the pre-Socratic philosophers. We mentioned Protagoras earlier. Some fundamental ideas that became the building blocks for fundamentalism, for humanism, although only fragments of his work do survive. He made one of the first agnostic statements about the gods. I am able to know neither that they exist, nor that they do not exist, nor what kind they are in any form. For many things prevent me from knowing this, its obscurity and the brevity of human lives. And that is sort of the important bit. The measure of a man, the brevity of human lives. What Augustine referred to as the seculum, or the mortal lifespan, which is where we get the word secular. Even though Augustine was a theist, he was arguably the theist, because he was more Christian than fucking Paul was, but never mind that. He gave us the term that we now refer to as secular, referring to stuff that happens within the mortal lifespan. And Protagoras tells us we can only know what we can learn within a mortal lifespan. Now, we have developed a few cheat codes about that. Writing, for example, we can learn what other people learned in their lifespans and save quite a bit of time and compound our knowledge that way. But we do still have a limited time ourselves. So there's that. And what we do with our limited time varies and is up to each of us. We should be free to make our own choices. Like Lil, who has chosen to be a member for 7 months. Thank you, Lil. And says, what do humanists say about boobies? What say you, humanists out there? What do you think of boobies? We're dying to know. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Well, they're it's not like dodos. They're not on the verge of extinction or anything, but like, don't hurt the boobies. They are precious. We love the boobies. It's true. It's true. I honestly, I love. So Lil sent me this so that I can grab a boobie on screen. I'm a sucker for puns. What can I say? All righty. I need to move along. I realize people come here for the tangents, but I am tangenting badly. Well, I'm not even really tangenting. I'm just like, I'm expounding too much on each specific thing. I need to go faster if I want to get through the things I want to get to. Okay, so Socrates spoke about the need to know thyself. His thought changed the focus of the then contemporary philosophy from nature to humans and human well-being. He was a theist executed for atheism. Well, that wasn't exactly why he was executed, but kind of. And he investigated the nature of morality through reasoning. Aristotle taught rationalism and a system of ethics based on human nature that also parallels humanist thought in some respects, right? Like there's a bit more to it, but also, and this is sort of important, this had to happen in the pre-Christian era because even in their time, Socrates, who may or may not have even existed, through Aristotle, that period, even then, when people were much more willing to allow the philosophers to question the unquestionable, saying we have to base logic on just what we can observe in nature and not on what people think the will of the gods might be, was a radical statement. It's a how dare you kind of statement to question the will of the gods. In fact, to say the will of the gods doesn't matter, you're going to bring a cataclysm on our entire city. He got away with it because of the building blocks of the previous philosophers spreading the seeds of these ideas. And also some of the other stuff he came up with was super useful. So details though. But it was a thing. It was a very difficult thing to put out there because people did not like it. They didn't like their pre-existing beliefs being called into question under the light of reason because it would make it harder to abuse other people. And once the Christians happened, people talk about what brought the age of philosophy to an end. Well, it didn't really end. It just kind of got muted. And it got muted when the Christians showed up. And if you started saying we have to figure out the rules of the natural world without regard to any superstition or mythology, just based on what we can observe, measure, and test ourselves, they burned you at the fucking stake. Which is why we had a dark age. Well, it's one of the reasons we had a dark age. But I digress. We covered a little bit of that yesterday, the way Augustine both caused the preservation of some of the ancient Greek works, but also pushed them out of the spotlight in favor of Catholic dogma. We don't need those philosophical guys' teachings. We have the revealed word of the all-knowing God. What could possibly go wrong? So yeah, the advancement of knowledge, of science, of philosophy came basically to a standstill for around 1,000 years. Thanks, Christians. Awesome. C'est la vie. But that was a big step, trying to say we need to investigate the world as it is. And again, you can be a theist and do that. You can be a Christian and say, I believe in the undead carpenter ghost. Or you can be, an ancient Egyptian recreationist. You can say, I believe in the great sun god Ra. Or you can be a Neo-Astaru or a new heathen and say, I believe in the great thunder god Thor, and still be a humanist. You can even connect it to your religion if you really want to, but you don't have to, because it's as Augustine put it, there are two separate magisteria. There's the real world where humans live, and it can only be run by humans doing human things, making human laws for human lives. And then there's the spiritual world, which is ruled by God's law. My goodness. There's a lot. There is a lot. In the 3rd century BCE, Epicurus, we talked about him a little bit, he developed an influential human-centered philosophy that focused on achieving eudaimonia, which sounds almost Italian. Basically, it means a condition of good spirit or a persistent happiness. Sort of the opposite of chronic depression. It's like, well, think of me 2 years ago, like just constantly happy. It's sort of like that. It's not like euphoria. It's just like you've got your baseline neutral state, and then when you suffer from chronic depression, you've got your subdued state that not necessarily sad, but muted emotions. Happiness is sort of like global warming on the emotional scale, at least this kind of happiness, insofar as it's an elevated emotional state. Sometimes it'll be a little bit stormier, but overall, you're going to have a warmer temperature, you know? So Epicurus continued, Democritus's atomist theory, a materialist theory that suggests the fundamental unit of the universe is an indivisible atom. Well, they weren't quite right about that, but also we named the atom after Democritus's idea. We didn't discover the atom that Democritus described and then proved him wrong about it being indivisible. We just named the wrong thing. That's on us. Human happiness, living well, friendship, and the avoidance of excesses were key ingredients to the Epicurean philosophy that flourished in and beyond the post-Hellenistic world, where it could. It is a repeated view among scholars that the humanistic features of ancient Greek thought are the roots of humanism 2,000 years later. Well, some of the roots. I would offer that there's quite a lot of Eastern philosophy mixed in as well, because the Renaissance was the result of the introduction of Eastern thought into the... Never mind, it's not important. Other predecessor movements that sometimes use the same or equivalent vocabulary to modern Western humanism can be found in Chinese philosophy. What did I just say? I could swear I just said that. My goodness. And Jer says, my baseline is the depressed state. I feel that. I get that. There's a lot of things. There's a lot. Every stressor in our lives that we can't do something about weighs us down. And the more of them stack up, things like constant pain or recurrent pain. Maybe it's not constant, but sometimes it spikes and it just is there for no reason. And it's a pain. It's a pain of pain. Other factors like your country becoming a fascist oligarchy and you can't do anything about it. Or the cost of food becoming unsustainable, such that you have to drain what savings you have to afford your weekly groceries. Or the cost of medicine, or the cost of rent, or the cost of all the things all at the same time, etc. Chrissy says, my baseline is exhausted. It makes it harder to sustain that higher emotional state. All these things, I think it's more like a spectrum, right? Like we've got our extreme moods dealing with specific immediate stimulus, but then we've got our normal range, the default where we are when we're not dealing with immediate stimulus. It's just the totality of the pluses and minuses weighing on our mind. And when we've got more minuses, we're off on the minus side. That's just where our baseline is. We can still ping into happiness when a stimulus hits us, but we're in that lower state. Whereas when there's more pluses than minuses, we'll be more on the other side, sort of like that. It's intuitive, so it's probably wrong, but it makes sense, Let me see here. Arabic translations of ancient Greek literature during the Abbasid Caliphate in the 8th and 9th centuries influenced Islamic philosophers. And that's true. Islam, so this is the golden age of Islam, something like the 7th through 9th or 10th century, something like that. In the golden age of Islam, they weren't just coming up with new philosophy. They were doing incredible work. They were advancing mathematics and sciences like astronomy, but even material science and engineering. There was one, I don't even know what to call this person. Let's say an academic invented a fucking steam engine in like the 11th century. What? They were so far ahead. They were like, remember what the steam engine did to Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries? The Islamic world had the potential to do that in the 11th century. But because the progressives were making so much progress, there was that cultural swing of the pendulum, and the conservatives became regressives, and the culture became ultra religious. And they wiped out their own progressives. They wiped out their own scientists, their own scholars, and dragged themselves back into a dark age. I don't think that this is a flaw with the way we develop civilizations or the way we handle things within the span of our own lifetime. I think this may be a flaw within humanity. Every time we start to make real progress at real speed, all of a sudden, a overwhelming tidal wave of regressive fear and hatred springs up and wipes out civilization. It's almost like we have a built-in self-destruct switch. And I don't know why that happens, and I don't know how to prevent it from happening again. I suspect there's separatism. I have my suspicions, but I don't know. But by trying to build humanism as a philosophy and not just a movement, we're hoping to generate a bulwark or at least a baffle to diminish the intensity of that tidal wave as it comes for civilization again this time. Maybe it'll help. Maybe we might even win. I'm very optimistic, aren't I? Okay, so things continued to grow in other areas of the world in those periods between the regressive tidal waves wiping out science and culture. So, we had the pre-Christian era in Europe. We had the Islamic Golden Age a few centuries later, and then they got wiped out. And the pockets of learning would move. Occasionally, scholars would manage to escape. Occasionally, they'd bring some knowledge with them and be able to teach more people. Sometimes even some of the books escaped too. And remember what we said about books being able to take the learning of one person's lifetime and imbue it in another person's lifetime. Books are super precious for that reason, which is why the regressives are always so interested in banning and burning books. Because they need to destroy knowledge. It's a requirement. So they'll move around to different areas where they're tolerated, or even better, given the resources they need to continue progress, to give the culture around them new wonders and advancements. I don't know why so many cultures are opposed to new scientific wonders and advancements, yet here we are. But they would try to keep the light of learning burning, or at least keep it from going out entirely. You might say there have been a few periods where the light of learning was an ember. But we've managed to keep it going so far, despite opposition from ourselves for some reason. Goodness. So we made it to the Renaissance. So in the Middle Ages, the core humanist principles emerged and were enhanced in religious cultures due to the synthesis of classical works and theological ideas. Now that's an interesting twist, because for the first time, despite the Dark Ages persisting for roughly 1,000 years, the power of the church had waned in some respects, and it was possible theists were within that framework, within that culture. They were finding ways to try to think forward without getting burned at the stake. If I push against the shape of the earth, burned at the stake. If I push against the earth going around the sun, burned at the stake. But if I push against this idea that the stars are just set into the dome, I didn't get burned. So maybe I can start investigating the stars and bring in some science that way. It was an evolutionary process of discovery with a lot of downsides, but people were still doing it. So there's that. Oh, let me see here. In the Renaissance, Petrarch and Erasmus didn't reinvent humanity. They just found the old Greek and Roman users' manuals in the trash and realized that they were still relevant for a world that was becoming too big for a single dogma. So with that, I want to switch over to a little video.
So humanism, or Renaissance humanism as it's also referred to, was the renewed belief in the value and power of the individual. Throughout the Middle
Which is a big deal. It's a very big deal because throughout the Dark Ages, there was that overwhelming belief that you still see in fundamentalist evangelical American Christianity today that the individual is worthless. You're corrupt, sinful, can never be good enough no matter what you do, and nothing you do matters or helps even a little bit. Life has no value, and that is diametrically opposed to progressive Christianity, which holds that humans are of the highest value to God, even if not for the sake of each other, but that God loves humans most, which is what the Bible actually says. But never mind that. So we don't even need secular humanism to see this dichotomy, but it's a very damaging dichotomy, especially since for 1,000 years, the human life has no value group held power. It was a miserable time.
Middle Ages, the general concept of man's place in the universe was one of obedience. People were expected to live their lives to worship God, and they were asked by the church to earn their way into heaven by following the sacraments and through good works. In the
and of course, paying the church. You got to pay the church. I mean, that is the ultimate good work, after all, is paying your tithes. Now, once again, I myself do not believe, but we're not saying religion is bad. There's a bad element corrupting religion that would exist even without a religion. It's not, in this case, the religion that is the problem. It's the bad people corrupting the religion. There are good people within the religion, and the religion itself seems to be largely agnostic on the good people versus bad people situation because, as per humanism, the gods aren't actually weighing in on these things. It's up to us.
14th century, intellectuals began to question this purely religious view of life on earth. They studied the classical languages of Greek and Latin in order to read the wisdom of writers from the ancient world.
I don't like how this is phrased. People have always been trying to learn and question. Just for a long period of time, they were burned for doing so, or tortured in other various ways. Because the regressives can't, you don't question, obey only. You know, that's the thing. Be godly and obey. That's still baked into a lot of flavors of modern Christianity too. But also, it's not like they suddenly had the idea of learning Greek and reading the old texts. They didn't have the old texts. They were lost. It wasn't until the Arabic conquest of Constantinople that drove the Eastern scholars back into the West that those works were reintroduced to people. And they were like, oh, what's this? Socrates, who's that guy?
When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, many of those ancient texts and the scholars who kept them made their way to Italy, which reintroduced...
What did I just say? But the words needed to be in the other order, because it's not like people suddenly had the idea of learning Greek. They needed the texts, and then they went, oh, what's this? I want to try to read it. You know, that the order matters here.
Introduced a treasure trove of writings to Western Europe. So suddenly, the ideas of ancient writers become available to a whole new audience. Ancient values such as civic virtue became subject.
The Eurocentrism, oh my goodness. The way they're making it out like only the West could process the knowledge of the ancient Greeks. It only mattered to all of humanity when the ruins of the Western Empire got their hands on Greek literature. Because none of the rest, it's main character syndrome on a cultural level. But it's still like that. Like the notes I was reading about humanism earlier in this very show are centered on Western European philosophy, as if the rest of the world doesn't matter and makes no progress ever. It's fucking wild that even humanist thought is contaminated with this fucking ethnocentrism. Duh.
Subjects of conversation. And as more people started reading these texts, the demand for lay education, for schools run outside the realm of monastic communities and outside of the church, well, that increased. Wealthy families began to support the schools and send their children to the schools to learn Greek and Latin and gain access.
Well, there's a lot of complicated story to this. It's not super important for the history of humanism. We'll just let this one go past. But there is a big fucking asterisk on this point.
Access to ancient ideas. The problem was that some of those ideas came into conflict with the teaching and doctrine of the Catholic Church.
Dun dun dun. You can't be in conflict with the Catholics because they'll burn you. Now, as communist number 09182 points out, the burnings really ramped up after the 1600s, and that's true. As intellectual questioning got more common, the human-flavored bonfires got a lot more popular. But that's not to say they were unheard of before, or after, or even still today. Yeah, we're still doing that. Yeah.
Humanism had at its core the belief in two things: individualism and secularism. That is, a departure from religion.
I don't think that's true. There is an element of individualistic awareness within humanism, but I don't think it prizes individualism over collectivism, because the core belief, if you want to put it that way, is that human lives matter. You can't think human lives matter and simultaneously say other humans don't matter. These are incompatible perspectives, So I don't think this no gods, no others, just me, this way it's being painted as a selfish perspective. You can be a humanist and be selfish, absolutely. But to suggest that it's individualistic, I don't think that's inherent to the philosophical path.
However, it's important to understand that humanists didn't really reject Catholicism, and they didn't reject religion. What they wanted to do is they wanted to take the ideas of the...
That's neither of these guys is Christian. Just saying.
The ancients, and use education to better understand the world while still retaining their Catholic beliefs. Now, maybe what I said just doesn't make sense, but if you bear with me, I think it'll all kind of come together. What we need to do now that we understand what humanism is to take a look at four.
He didn't really explain what humanism is, but never mind that. We're more into the history today. We covered what it is in previous days.
Of the most influential humanist thinkers. Petrarch is generally regarded as the father of the Renaissance. Writing in the 14th century, he was the first guy who looked at the Middle Ages as a period of darkness and promoted the belief that medieval culture was ignorant of classical ideals.
Promoted the belief? You mean the demonstrable fact that medieval culture was ignorant of history, like all of it, and that the present state of living with serfs and torturing and people being treated like cattle was dark? And maybe, just maybe, humans didn't have to live that way? And in fact, if it's true that humans don't have to live that way, that it is a cruelty, an evil inflicted upon people to force them to live that way. Perhaps. Just a belief, though.
He was totally wrong about this, and every medieval...
He was totally wrong, guys. Living in ignorance and being treated like cattle is actually good for you, I guess.
Scholar today can come up with a long list of reasons why he was wrong. But Petrarch understood that new movements need to set themselves apart from the current society. So he might have overstated things a little bit. He scoured the monasteries of Europe for
He was overstating his. Can you tell that our host is Catholic and is like, he just cannot help but apologize for Catholicism and the horrible things that it did? Because remember, the Catholics actually did have the knowledge of the old empire in the times before preserved and kept it from the people on purpose to maintain power. All the kings had to go to Rome and kiss the ring to reaffirm their divine authority to rule their little fiefdoms and shit. But no, we can't admit that this was horrible. No.
Ancient texts and promoted the study of classical Latin. We're talking about the time of Julius Caesar, that sort of period. He also promoted the use of something called the vernacular. Those are the spoken languages throughout.
See, this is another thing that doesn't actually have anything to do with humanism. It's with not just religious apologetics, but specifically Catholic, because the Catholics were opposed to people learning the old languages and definitely not translating old stuff into new languages. Using the vernacular could get you burned. You were not allowed to translate the Bible even into another scholarly language, let alone the language of the people, because, I mean, have you read this thing? If you read this thing for yourself, you will stop being Catholic in a big damn hurry.
Throughout Europe, in his case, it was Italian. He promoted these in writing instead of the medieval Latin that monks and church scholars were using at the time. By the 15th century, writers began identifying themselves as humanist. Lorenzo Valla from Rome dedicated his adult life to.
Now, reminder from previous videos, the use of ism and ist and all this stuff, it indicates a school of thought, a belief system within the European tradition at the very least. So a humanist is distinct from, say, a theist, but it's also distinct from an atheist, because by this time, even though that word is neutral in its meaning, it had a negative connotation. It was a derogatory term. In fact, a person who disagreed on a certain church matter wouldn't be called a heretic, they'd be called an atheist. You're denying God if you deny that it's wrong to force 11-year-old girls to marry 40-year-old men. You're a dirty atheist denying God's ways.
To use his humanist education to help the church. He even tried to get the job of papal secretary, but was unsuccessful. So he set off around Europe, intensely studying Greek and Latin, finding every text he possibly could. And he pushed the concept that classical Latin, especially that of about the 200 years surrounding the birth of Christ, as being the purest, most beautiful form of Latin in history.
Pulling a French Academy with the Latin. But what is the basis for that? Is it because it's around the birth of... That's the divine language. That was as close as we ever got. Latin evolved until that point and then needed to stop. But it kept changing, as languages do, and so it became corrupt. And Tower of Babel effect means that we lost the ability to understand the depth of meaning in the old words. And there actually is something to that. Not that the birth of Christ was some magical time where Latin was the most perfectest, but Latin around that time was very adaptable, shall we say. Lots of words could mean lots of different things, and the specific meaning was determined by the context. Sort of like modern ASL. The words are words, but they're really ideas. The word represents a whole idea, and which application of that idea fits in the sentence depends on the rest of the sentence. It's for a more direct means of communicating whole thoughts rather than splitting hairs over specific concepts the way modern English tries to do, especially the Philobros. In a way, it was a better way to communicate with each other. way more efficient, and you could convey way more meaning with much fewer words. But the flip side is people who didn't speak that form of the language would have a harder time understanding what the hell you were saying, which is why people in the future trying to translate stuff from the past fight over what the meaning of a given passage was. It causes confusion for later people.
History. Now, we all know that languages change over time, and he wanted to restore Latin to its rightful position over the vernacular.
Now, its rightful place. I mean, you could just, like, the French Academy's job, as it were, is to keep the French language frozen in the Napoleonic era. They're not doing a very good job because you can't actually stop a language from evolving. But that was their goal. That's their charter. That's what they were created to do. You could try to do that and revert modern Italian back to ancient Latin. I don't think it would work, but you could try. It could be fun.
Avala's deep understanding of Latin and its development over time led to some trouble. His studies brought to his attention a thing called the Donation of Constantine. This is a document in which the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 4th century gave vast amounts of land to the Catholic Church. Now, what Vala found was that the Latin used in the document didn't match the Latin being used during Constantine's time, but it was
You mean people inserted that later? Oh, goodness, that never happens. The scandal.
was actually a form of language being used around 400 years later. In other words, he proved through linguistic analysis that the document was a fraud. Now, that didn't make his beloved Catholic Church happy, but ironically, after many years of criticism, he was named papal secretary in 1447.
Weird how that works, isn't it? How you do good work, and you get denied your promotion. But then as soon as you discover something that you can blackmail the powers that be with, suddenly they want to bestow upon you every boon and keep you very happy. Strange how that works, isn't it? My goodness.
7, proving that humanism had won over tradition and orthodoxy.
It sounds like corruption won over tradition and orthodoxy, but I digress. Holy shit. So there's a lot more to this, of course, but that's sort of how things got going into the Renaissance. And from there, as we've covered in other shows before, the Enlightenment happens. I believe we did a few episodes on that back in back in December. So I won't cover it all again right now. I'm sure in a few months we'll have to do it again because, every 6 months or so, the audience completely changes over. Almost completely. There's a few people who've been around longer than that, but still. But we don't have to do it today. Today, we've gotten humanism from the ancient time up to the start of the Renaissance. And from the Renaissance, the Enlightenment takes over. And that is sort of what supercharges humanism. Now, I do have a little bit more to say, but we're going to connect up with the present by taking a step away from humanism. We're going to look at other magical claims that confront the magical claims running around in the world today. Why do some people believe the magical claims from antiquity and not the much stronger magical claims of the present, where there are living witnesses, where there is even video evidence? To be specific, why do people believe that Muhammad split the moon when we can see the moon is in one piece? Why do people believe Jesus rose from the dead in an empty tomb when we don't even have an empty tomb, and that story didn't start getting circulated until everyone who was alive had died of old age? But they don't believe that a man living today can do similar miracles, like bring back the dead or walk on water, despite millions of witnesses and video evidence. Living witnesses, people still alive today. We're going to get into that tomorrow. For the moment, I do want to take a bit to consider media, because media matters a lot for all. I mean, we're on media right now. In the ancient times, there was the theater. There was Sophocles and Euripides writing stories, writing plays, and moving the point of view of the epic tales that shaped culture and moved civilization forward from the will of the gods to the nature of humans, specifically to the internal suffering of the hero. It became human-centered, and it became very popular because people could relate to human feelings a lot better than they could to angry gods. It stopped being mythology and started being what we now think of as theater, the stories of us, even if they're fictional. It was the first time that human feelings were treated as being worth talking about. It was almost the doorway to therapy. Maybe that'll be a future episode too. In the modern media, we still have something of that. We've gone from documentaries about the life of the saints and how they rejected their humanity, what made them more holy than the average person, to sort of a life of me kind of thing. Our current media landscape is the ultimate humanist project. It's a billion people documenting their own experiences in real time as primary source material. Pluses and minuses for that. I try to use my time to educate, make the world a little bit better where I can, as I can. But a lot of people talk about their own lives and really not much else. Sometimes their own perspective, sometimes where their own thinking is. But a lot of the very, very famous people who are famous for being famous, it's literally me all the time. I don't know that that's necessarily humanism, but there is some relatability to that by seeing people whose focus is entirely on themselves, reinforced by an entire crew, a production group with cameras and producers and directors and gaffers and so forth, who are as invested in the me as the person themselves are. It creates this spiraling storm of self-interest, shall we say. Despite how removed from reality that makes the people at the center of those vortexes, it creates an engaging subject for people to observe. Because first of all, you've got your favorite characters, whether you like one of the Kardashians or one of the, I don't know the fucking famous people in front of cameras. Another one, we'll say, a Jenner, I guess. Whatever the case may be. It lets us see their humanity despite their hubris, but also puts them in stark contrast to our own feelings. Like when they kick a puppy because the puppy's in the way, we feel revulsion. We're like, I would never do that. That's inhumane. It makes us more aware of what makes us different. And some of the good things about ourselves at that. So, being a humanist is considerably harder than being a zealot. A fundamentalist, an extremist, you can just wave your hand and say it's all part of God's plan. We can't do that. We have to take responsibility. We have to step up and we have to try to help each other because there isn't anyone else who's coming to help us. We didn't become humanists because we found the truth. We became humanists because we realized that we were alone in the cockpit of this plane and someone had to start flying it. So stop waiting for a sign from on high. You are the sign. Maybe we should start acting like it. Thank you all so much for watching. Tomorrow, miracles. And as always, try not to die. Thanks to all our patrons and top-level members for February. Miranda, Karen Butcher, Jimmy Tux, Ian Chen, Maya Adkison, Jessica the Trans Metal Alchemist, Robin Webster, Lilith, Emberlyn, The Barely Bearable Atheist, Eric Wander, Jason Jacoby, Lil of All Trades, Deviant Outcast, Secular Feelinist, Kelly King, the Detroit Atheist Queen, Geo Sam, Thriver Scapegoat, The Godless Engineer, Why? Because Weed Bro, Katie Bluebird, and Fro from Norway. And you can add your name here next month by signing up at patreon.com/betterthanember or by joining Emberships here on YouTube at the Cinder level, which also includes all the custom emojis, tons of member-exclusive content, member-only live streams, and a bunch of other stuff. I deeply appreciate all the supporters who keep this channel going. Thank you so much. Because of you, we're building a wonderful community that I'm very proud of.